Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again from Film Fanatic headquarters. It is 10:52 on a beautiful Saturday morning. So hope everyone's doing good. Hope everyone has some fun plans for this weekend. I think it's supposed to be really nice and a beautiful weekend. So yeah, this is a special show. I went to the movies last night and saw a pretty incredible movie. I was kind of blown away by this movie. Um, it was one of those experiences where I went with my girlfriend and we went on a movie date, which was really fantastic. We hadn't really done that in a long time. It was just the two of us. Usually when I've been going to the movies, I usually go with like a little group of friends. Um, and there's usually a little group of us, two or three of us, or sometimes a little bit more. But it was nice to just go, just the two of us having a movie date. Because again, it was something we haven't really done in a while, so that was pretty special. But before I get into the movie, you know, uh, the main topic at hand is Stephen King. We went to go see The Long Walk, which is a movie that just came out. I think it came out 2 weeks ago. And I didn't know anything about this movie. I went into it totally cold, but learned a lot about. After I got done watching the movie, I looked up more information about this movie and also in regards to the story. So, which was super interesting and super cool. And Stephen King, I mean, he's definitely kind of he's kind of an American treasure as far as horror and as just a living, breathing literary figure who is like so prolific. It's unbelievable. My favorite, I mean, there's so many books. There's so many. I mean, I can't think of any author out there in the world in general like that has had more adaptations of his work to the big screen. And there's so many, but I also feel that there there's some films and adaptations that probably are not necessarily that great, but I think as far as like really successful adaptations of his stories, that outweighs any of the clunkers. Um, so many. I mean, you have, and it's funny too. I did not, it just kind of happened, and it wasn't a planned thing. But lately, I've been watching Stephen King adaptation movies at home. It just kind of happened. Like I watched, and I'm going to do a show on it pretty soon. The other night, a couple of nights ago, I watched Christine. I hadn't seen that movie in a super long time, and I realized I never did a show on that movie. Of course, directed by John Carpenter. It's an awesome movie, and I hadn't seen it in years. Totally holds up. Classic. I think it's one of the classic John Carpenter movies. It's funny enough too because going back to the last Halloween film that came out, Halloween Ends, which a lot of people did not like or a lot of people hated. I actually really like that movie. I actually love that movie. There's a lot of references to from that movie or in that movie that is taken from Christine. Christine is like was a huge influence on that movie, even with the lead character's name, which is kind of interesting, and it definitely has that kind of vibe. But anyway, as far as other adaptations of some of his, classic books, I mean, it is a, really famous one, if not the most famous. The original version and then the new version, which is awesome, which I haven't done any shows on any, whether it was the Tim Curry version or the newer version that came out, which would be something to do. Other films, I mean, Stand By Me, classic. You have The Dead Zone, which is one of my favorites, also with Christopher Walken, directed by master the master David Cronenberg. Um, the Green Mile is fantastic. I saw, and also this past summer, I went to go see The Shawshank Redemption in the theater, which was, which is such a classic. And, those are more of his dramas, and probably my favorite Kubrick. It's definitely my favorite Stanley Kubrick film, but I also feel like and it's kind of it's in a weird place in history, I think, because, basically Kubrick took the premise of The Shining, of course, which is a Stephen King book as well, and kind of gutted it and adapted it for the big screen. And I think it's really rare. I think it's a really rare exception to kind of the rule, because a lot of the times, when you take classic books and films try to, they try to adapt them for the big screen. There's a lot of the times, well, just because of the time frame and kind of maybe the story is very ambitious. How are they going to adapt it to the big screen? And sometimes it's not as good, or or not on par with the book. But I think with The Shining, um, I think it's one of those really rare things where Kubrick did all the right things, and I think it's better than the book. I'm actually not a very big fan of the book, of the original story, because I think there's a lot of silly things in it. I also feel like there's a lot of fat in the story, and Kubrick really just came in with a butcher knife and just cut it all out. But anyway, and Pet Cemetery is another one. I love that book. That I remember that was probably as a kid the first Stephen King book I ever read, and it scared the shit out of me. And the movie is incredible. I bought a really amazing Blu-ray version of the original about a year or two ago, and I've done I know I did a show on that when I watched it. Incredible movie, one of his best adaptations, and I think truly one of the legitimately scary horror films that exist. The remake is absolutely atrocious. Yeah, it's unwatchable. But other films, I mean, so many great ones, so many great ones. So going into this movie, The Long Walk, again, I did not know anything about it. I purposely went in. I wanted to go into it cold, and I remember talking to to Heather, my girlfriend, about it, and she did the same thing. She was like, "Okay, I don't." She didn't know anything about the story. Had not read the book. I have not read the book, and saw the same trailer that I saw, and purposely stayed away from it. And we had kind of an interesting conversation on the way to the movie. We went to Flagship Cinema down in Thomaston, which is about 10 minutes or 7 minutes from her house, which so it's super convenient. And we were, driving over there, and I was like saying, where I was talking to her about, like how I haven't looked anything up about the movie. I didn't know anything about it. I know I wasn't even honestly I wasn't even sure if it was an adaptation of a Stephen King book, which it is. But at that time, yesterday, I wasn't really sure. I heard, I thought I had heard that it was. So I had, when we were driving over, I had said, yeah, I don't really know what this movie is about, and I've tried to stay as clear from any kind of reviews, and I only watched that one single trailer that I saw, and I said the way I'd heard about this movie was I went to the movies earlier this summer to see Weapons with a little group of friends, which was really good, really a really great movie, and I did a show on that. And there was a trailer for The Long Walk before Weapons, and that was the first time I had heard about it, and that was the only time I really watched the trailer for it. And I had said, yeah, the trailer looked pretty interesting, and I liked that it made me want to watch it, which is what a good trailer should do. And but I didn't really know what it was about. I thought, okay, maybe it is. I kind of got these vibes that it was like a post-apocalyptic film. I thought, well, maybe it put out these vibes that I thought maybe this is like a zombie apocalypse film, um, or like more of a melodrama or a horror film. I wasn't sure, and I was like, "That's great. That's what you want. That's the power. That's the to me is like the power or a testimony of a really well done trailer. Because too often these days trailers like give away everything. They kind of act like a recap of if you watch a TV show or a streaming television show, a lot of the times they have these recaps before you start a next season, and it basically tells the entire story in this quick, really detailed synopsis or review. And I feel like most trailers now do that, and so this one did not do that. And so a good trailer should make you interested and pique your interest, and this one definitely did. And I did not really know what it was about. And she also said the same thing. She stayed away from it, and I had said that I had heard, here and there that this film was very, very deep, very powerful. That was it, and that it was really, really good. And I was, quite honestly, I was so moved by this movie. Um, and I was kind of there were moments of this film where I was kind of shocked and stunned, and I mean, really, the a good movie should really transport you to an alternate universe. To me, it's like filmmaking is the ultimate form of artistic expression. I think it's the most complex medium that there is. As far as to create a film, it's the hardest thing I think an artist can do, because it's all about sight and sound. And I feel like this movie was that experience of where I was transported to it. For those 2 hours, I was transported to a completely new and different reality. The premise of this film is just absolutely um, awesome. And basically, the premise of the film is about. I don't want to go into spoilers because I think there's a lot of surprises in this film. And that's I don't know. That's kind of putting it mildly. But there are a lot of surprises. Mark Hamill is in this film, and Luke Skywalker, which I forgot he was in this movie. He was just amazing. One of his best roles, even though he's actually not in it a lot. He doesn't have a lot of dialogue, but his presence is so strong and so fantastic. But the basic premise of the story is it is a more or less a post-apocalyptic film, and the basic premise of the film is you're kind of thrust into the story pretty much from the beginning. And the story kind of is this scenario of there was this basically like an apocalyptic war that happens, and afterwards, the world is left in complete and utter devastation. And the government that is running things at this current time, or at this in the story, is basically an all-out kind of dictatorship, a fascist run government. And they have this more or less kind of this competition called the Long Walk that they hold every year, where people can participate in it. And but what the scenario is if they participate in this thing called the Long Walk, and they basically walk they until there's one last person standing. And that person who comes away as the survivor can gets this massively huge financial prize, and they get this, basically any wish that they want as their prize. And during the long walk, it is all heavily militarized. There's guns, drawn on all of the walkers the whole entire time, and as one person, and as people collapse and just cannot more or less compete anymore, they are executed. And it's I will say this movie is fucking brutal as all hell. It's one of the most brutal movies I've seen in recent times. It's brutal. Like the violence in this movie and the shock of some of the violence is pretty, well, to say it's pretty intense is kind of putting it mildly. It's all guns blazing, like, well, literally, and it's really brutal. It's I would say the violence in this movie, I was not expecting that at all. Um, and I mean the movie, obviously there's so many things about this movie. Again, the story is kind of this post-apocalyptic dystopian tale, and it's fairly straightforward. But underneath all of that stuff, it raises so many questions, and there's so many interesting things that it makes you think about. So on the surface, it's pretty straightforward, the general storyline, but because of the really kind of tight premise, underneath the surface, I feel like it's incredibly complex. And that's the thing that's, I mean, just story wise, makes this film really incredibly engaging. And a lot of the times I talk about, you know, when we see a film as a fan, or maybe mostly when it pertains to seeing a movie, on the big screen for the first time. I always talk about kind of like your gut, or at least my gut reaction to things. It can be anything. Like the first time I see I might go to an art gallery and I see a painting, or the first time I hear a new band or a particular song, or the first time I see a movie, in this case, a new movie. Sometimes that process is a little bit different, and it's different for other people. But typically for me, it's like I like if I see when it comes to this scenario, I'll see the movie, go to the movies and see a movie that I obviously have not seen before, and sometimes I like right away, I'm drawn to it. I'm in love with what I'm experiencing, and I really like the movie, and I have this immediate kind of drawn where I'm just drawn into it, and then sometimes the film is this thing of where it might take this period of time to kind of seep in, where you're like, yep, okay, I'm you generally liked it, but maybe after a couple of days it settles in, and you're like, wow, that was really good, or that was a really fun time. And and then, so typically when I see a movie in the theater, I usually like give myself, more or less a 24-hour time period to kind of process the movie, whether it was a really good experience or not a great experience, or just a kind of a bland experience. And usually after 24 hours or a couple of days, I, will do a show on the movie. But just in general, I usually arrive at my place as to like how I actually feel about the movie. But more often than not, it always goes back to kind of my gut reaction to something. I don't think when you experience some new piece of art for the first time, I don't really think it's like it shouldn't be an intellectual thing. It should be just I look at it as more of a kind of a primal thing, like how you react to something. You know, the vibe that it creates. And it's not an intellectual thing. I think sometimes if you try to intellectualize things too much, it can get in the way of the process. But it also, you know, that it also depends very much on the content that you're absorbing. But I think that's generally something that I kind of that kind of happens to me all the time. And then then I've had a lot of experiences where, well, like another experience, for instance, like the first I had heard so much about the Terrifier movies, which are this horror franchise, this kind of slasher franchise with Art the Clown that has kind of become this phenomenon. And I had not seen any of the movies. I kept hearing all these things about it, and I finally sat and I watched the first Terrifier. And I remember watching it, and I watched it at home, and I liked it, and I was engaged. I was pretty blown away by some of the gore, and I kind of enjoyed it. And then the next day or two, I started feeling like I was forgetting about everything that I experienced, and it to me after 2 or 3 days of experiencing it, I was like, well, it was like to me it was kind of like eating a bunch of cotton candy, where it looks cool, it tastes good when you eat it, but then afterwards you're just like, there's no substance to it. And that's how it was when I saw that movie. So sometimes that happens where you see a movie and it doesn't really, hold any water afterwards. But I have to say, that being all said, I think The Long Walk for me is probably, I have to say it's the best. I think it's the best movie that I've seen this year of 2025. I was blown away by how powerful this movie was. I mean, there were times where I could feel a few tears coming on, and it was powerful. It was a very powerful story, and it kind of brought a few other great Stephen King adaptation films to mind: The Shawshank Redemption, and also movies like Stand by Me. It's very much it's got a lot of different elements. This movie, it's got it's obviously a post-apocalyptic film. It's very very dark, but it's also incredibly mainly just dialogue driven, and it's like a melodrama, and there's definitely horror elements, and coupled with the brutal violence in this movie as well. But it's done tastefully. It's done in a tasteful way where it's not like it felt like there is like the level of violence in this movie is kind of astounding and brutal. But I have to say, even with that being said, it's in its own way. It's kind of tastefully done. It's not overused. Every time when you do see it, when there is a violent thing that happens in the story, it really, because it's done in a way where it's like really carefully curated. It's that much more powerful. It's not just on the screen to be on the screen. So it's very impactful. And the cast is astounding. Like the cast is just amazing. The script is absolutely incredible. There are a bunch of actors. Only one that I knew of before, or as I was watching this movie. It was directed by Francis Lawrence, who I think did some of the Hunger Game movies. But as a film that was directed by this guy Francis Lawrence, it's incredible. Like the cinematography is absolutely incredible. The the premise. I mean, when you think the basic scenario, if it was handled in a way that was, with someone who was less talented as a director, it could have been just, it could be a boring movie because essentially it's 2 hours. It's kind of, well, a road movie, but it's essentially a group of men, young men, on this journey just talking for 2 hours. That's essentially what it is. And and if it was directed by someone who wasn't as talented as this director was, it could have, or if the script wasn't as good, it could be just a very talky, boring kind of a film. But it's not like, it's not in any way, shape, or form. The cast is incredible. David Johnson, who was in Fede Alvarez's Romulus, which I was not a fan of that movie at all, but David Johnson plays a character in that. Basically, he plays this AI kind of robot character. He's actually pretty good in that movie, but he was in a Long Walk, and he's phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. Cooper Hoffman is also more or less the lead in this film as well. The thing that I found out last night about Cooper Hoffman, which blew my mind, is he is the son of Philip, the late great actor Philip Seymour Hoffman, which I was just like, what? Like, that's insane. And he's like phenomenal in this movie. Ben Wing, also just incredible. And again, like I mentioned, Mark Hamill, just incredible. Roman Griffin Davis, uh, Garrett Waring, Charlie Plummer, or I should say, Judy Greer is exceptional. She plays the mother in this movie, and she's not in the film a lot, but her performance is kind of jaw dropping. Jordan Jordan Gonzalez, another phenomenal actor. Joshua Uljic, Josh Hamilton, and Keenan Lemphren. And they're, again, this movie is well, it's kind of putting it mildly, but it's incredibly stark. And it is a, you could say, I mean, it's interesting when we left the film, when we left the movie, there was a few people, when we were walking out of the theater, there was a mother and a daughter, and it sounded like, uh, I could tell, I overheard their conversation when they were going into the theater, that the mom was taking out her daughter to the movies for her birthday, and they were there with a couple of other friends. And I saw them leave. They were right in front of us, and we went. We walked out into the lobby, and I could hear them talking about the movie. And there was a lot of people there. The theater was actually pretty full, which was cool to see, which doesn't really happen these days. And I could hear them talking about the movie, and I heard that the daughter say to the mother, "Wow, that was probably the most depressing movie I've ever seen." And the mother was like, "Yeah, that was, yeah." She was like in total agreement. And in some ways, I would say, I mean, this movie is. You could say this film is incredibly depressing, but there's so much. I think the script, the dialogue, and how, you know, again, like I said, underneath, just under the surface of this story that's pretty straightforward, there's so many complex things that this uh, story kind of ties ties into, or so many different things it brings into the mix. There's so many different ingredients, like right underneath the surface, because it lends itself to talking about, I mean, just everything from like politics to you know uh, fascism to racism, class warfare, economic plights, just there's so many different things that this and love and hope and family. I mean, there's so many things that this movie kind of deals with. And yeah, on one hand, you could say, I mean, this movie is definitely kind of, it's incredibly dark. It's brutal as all hell. And you could say, yeah, this movie is like super depressing. But I think the thing that's so great about this movie is like as we're getting to know all of these characters on this like kind of horrific journey, there's so much levity I think within the script, and it brought me back and it made me think of films like Stand by Me and Shawshank Redemption, where it's a melodrama, but there's a lot of humor. There's actually a lot of humor that happens between these characters, because these are all essentially kids or young men that are kind of coming of age. They're growing into themselves as adults. So those are things that they're talking about. But there's a lot of humor, and I feel like as brutal and as dark as this film is, because there's such a richness to the way these characters interact and talking about all kinds of different things, and there's actually a lot of humor in this movie. I feel like no, there's a lot of levity in this movie. I think there is a lot of levity, and so there is. It's not a movie where it's unrelenting, and I definitely never felt like it was too much. I feel like there was a pretty good balance, because there are all of these other colors in the story. Like I said, with these characters, how they interact as just being kind of human beings, and who they are, and you're getting to know their backgrounds, and they're small talking about their their just things about sex or their relationships with their parents, or school, or their backgrounds, and telling these little jokes, and all of these things. And I think that so the script is so good that there is a levity to it, so it's not like unrelenting. The I will say the ending is super fucking intense, and I did not see that coming. And it's like, wow, okay, holy shit. You could take away from it that you know you know that the end is nigh, like it's the end of humanity, kind of a thing. So you could take it in that, or think of it in that direction. But I think that the story is so well done and so well conceived that there's a lot of colors and there is levity to it. One, like an example of where I feel, and it's a good film, but it's a movie that is super hard to get through because I feel like there's no levity to it. It's all so heavy and so incredibly serious, and there's no other colors going on where this movie, I think, just does an incredible job with doing giving the film levity. But Oppenheimer, that came out a few years back. um, Christopher Nolan's film, really a good film, but that movie is so serious and so stark, and it is a very dark film, obviously. But there's no, I feel like it's like a tall, you need a tall glass of water to get through that movie, and it's very dry, and there's no levity to it. It ultimately is just really dry, and it's hard to get through because there's no other palette to use. There's no other color palette to use in that film. So that movie left me kind of cold, even though it is good in a lot of ways. But this film has all of that variety, I think, within the script. Incredible. The other thing that I thought was just incredibly powerful with this film is the soundtrack. The film score for this movie is absolutely incredible. One of the best film scores that I've heard in recent time. I want to get, I want to buy or purchase the film score. It's exceptional. It's such an emotional movie. Like, and again, it has all of these things of where there's a hope, there's this essence, feeling of being hopeful, and having maybe integrity about who you are as a person to your family, and what love can be between two people, and also it is about death and fascism and hopelessness. So I mean, there's so many things that this movie touches on. But I was blown away by how powerful this movie is, and it definitely has horror elements. Obviously, it definitely is. I could see or say that the film definitely has horror elements. It has the it's definitely a post-apocalyptic film. Post-apocalyptic film. It's a melodrama. It's a kind of a coming of age story. It's definitely got horror elements. It's a dystopian tale. You know, and it's you could look at it as maybe being an action film to a degree. I mean, there's so many things in this film, and extraordinary. I'd see it again. I would definitely go see it again. And it's one of those films, and the cinematography is absolutely spectacular. It's one of those films that is, a, it's it's an example, primetime example as to why I go to the movies. Exceptional movie. I can't recommend this movie enough. I have to say, it's definitely the best movie I've seen this year of 2025. So, yeah. Thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.